be seated. We're still waiting on Ms. Rosenfeld?
Let me go check.
Okay. We okay?
Yes, Judge.
All right.
All
All right.
Reel them in.
Let's bring in the jury.
Juror dinner?
All right, counsel may be seated. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. I know it was a long 5 minutes. I think we're ready to proceed. Ready to call your next witness.
Yes, Your Honor. Defense call Sergeant Frank Ranzie. Right here, sir. Raise your right hand, face the clerk.
Do you swear or affirm that the evidence you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do. Would you stand right there? Good morning, Sergeant Ranzie.
Morning, sir.
Can you please state your full name and spell your last name for the record?
It's Frank Paul Ranzie, spelled R-A-N-Z-I-E.
All right, I want to begin by discussing your background. Prior to working in law enforcement, did you have any formal education in criminal justice?
Yeah, I did some study at John Jay College for Criminal Justice in New York
All right, when did you start working in law enforcement?
in 1983.
And who did you start working for?
The New York City Housing Police Department,
And what was your position?
a road patrol officer,
And how long did you work with the police in New York?
just shy of 5 years.
When did you move to Florida?
1988,
And who did you start working for in Florida?
City of Boynton Beach Police Department.
When you started working with the Boynton Beach Police Department, what was your initial position?
Road patrol officer,
And how long did you work with, in total, with the Boynton Beach Police Department?
24 years.
And at some point, did you get a promotion from road patrol officer?
Yes, I did.
And to what position?
Sergeant,
When was that?
1991.
And you said you worked with Boynton Beach for how long?
Almost 24 years,
And how long were you a sergeant for?
nearly 20.
And what do you currently do?
I'm a private investigator.
For who?
Myself, I just opened my own business recently. Before that, with a different firm.
Oh, what's your company's name?
Vertical Analysis Investigative Group.
All right, and getting back to your career with Boynton Beach Police Department, what were all the positions you held there?
Well, as a police officer, I was a road patrol officer. I got promoted relatively quick, within 3 years. From that, I went into our community policing division as our bicycle patrol sergeant. From there, I moved on to our vice narcotics position in charge of undercover operations. I went to internal affairs as a supervisor in charge of policing, the internal matters. From there, I went to our street crimes unit. After that, I went to our detective division, where I was assigned white-collar crime fraud, and from there, I was retired.
It's pretty extensive. I want to talk about your training and experience. Did you receive any training with NYPD? Or New York Housing Police, excuse me.
The basic academy, which was a 6-month academy.
And did you receive any specialized training on working with informants?
I worked in an anti-crime unit relatively quickly on the job because I was young and new, and they take, young people in their faces. So I learned undercover drug operations, reverse drug operations, and use and control of confidential informants, yes.
I assume there's quite a few of those in New York?
Yes.
And in your experience working in New York, through these investigations, you said you received specialized training?
Yes.
All right, and did you receive any specialized training working with informants with the Boynton Beach Police Department?
I obtained specialized training, yes.
And just to be clear, that wasn't through the department, right?
Well, the department allows you to go to get training. For example, if you want to take a course in undercover drug operations that's put on by Palm Beach State, you put in that you want to go, the department pays that cost, and then if you're allotted the time, either it's on duty, or you could take vacation time and you could attend. So the department, if it sponsors it, allows, permits you to get the training, but they don't train you at the police department, if that's what you're asking me.
I guess what I'm asking is you're not required to get this training.
No, sir.
So to get specialized training, you would have to take the initiative and get the training outside of the department.
Yes, sir.
And most officers didn't do that, correct?
I can't testify to most officers, I just know what I did.
All right, but did you take any initiative to obtain specialized training?
Yes, I did.
And in regard to, specifically to confidential informants,
Yes.
did you take any specialized training?
Yes, sir.
How many hours of training do you have in confidential informants?
Several hundred.
You say roughly 500?
It would be fair to say.
And would you agree that this is more than the other investigators assigned to Ms. Dippolito's case?
I do not have their dossiers and their background, so I cannot say I have more. I can only tell you I have a good amount of training.
All right, at the time of this investigation, you had more training than, let's say, Officer Moreno?
I don't know his background, sir. I really can't tell you if I had more training than him.
He was a younger officer than you.
Yeah, I supervised him at different points in my career, yes.
You were as, all right, let me take a step back. One moment, Your Honor. And just to be clear, if you want to be a good detective or a good sergeant and supervising an informant, you would have to go out on your own and get your specialized training, right?
You would have to get additional training, correct?
And you did this?
Yes.
And in the course of your career, prior to August 2009, Ms. Dippolito's investigation, you handled approximately 100 informants?
Yeah, that's just a rough estimate. I've been involved in thousands of drug-related cases and hundreds of other domestic-type cases, robberies, assaults, burglaries, and there's informants involved in a multitude of different crimes. So to say 100 that I personally supervise is a conservative number, yes.
So this wasn't your first rodeo?
No, sir.
All right. I want to discuss different types of informants. Is it fair to say that, just based on what you just said, that a lot of the informants were involved in drugs, gangs, robberies?
Well, that was my forte as a supervisor, and I commanded most of those teams, so that's where my expertise took me.
All right, and this was the only murder-for-hire investigation you ever handled, right?
That is true, yes.
And in the history of Boynton Beach Police Department, how many murder-for-hire investigations were there?
I was aware of one.
And these types of investigations are incredibly uncommon, right?
Yeah, that's a fair statement, yes.
And not just in Boynton Beach, throughout the country.
Correct.
And in terms of handling and controlling an informant, does it matter if it's a drug case, gang case, or murder-for-hire case?
Can you explain handling? Can you rephrase?
Maintaining control of your informant.
No, the control of a documented informant should be laterally the same. regardless of the type of case, as far as the control that the person in charge takes.
So whether it's a murder for hire investigation, a gang investigation, or a narcotics investigation, you're going to act the same in terms of controlling your informant.
Relatively, yes.
And that's because it's important to maintain the integrity of the investigation in all cases.
That's correct.
So even in cases where there's more of an exigency, you still have to handle and control the direction of the informant.
Always.
And once again, this is to maintain the integrity of the investigation,
Correct.
to make sure the informant doesn't go rogue,
Correct.
to make sure he doesn't do things like threaten the suspect,
Correct.
compromise the investigation.
Correct.
And back in 2009, did the Boynton Beach Police Department have a policy and procedure manual?
It's online. It's a virtual manual. It's not a hard copy.
So back in 2009, if a new detective was hired, she would not be provided with any kind of written book with procedures, right?
That's correct.
She'd have to go on the computer and figure out what all these directives were?
Well, you're supposed to read them. I mean, there's actually, you have to sign for them, and it's mandated that you read them, sign for them, and then it's governed by, somebody in another position that validates that Officer X, Y, Z did that. And if you didn't do it, you'd get a warning. You have to take that particular procedure, read it, and sign for it.
For example, you don't have Sergeant Paul Sheridan looking over your shoulder and making sure, not you, you don't have supervisors looking over people's shoulders making sure they're reading it.
No, sir.
And new directives would sporadically come out from the chief or the mayor?
Mayor, no, sir. It would be all internal. Internal, yeah. Chief of police, yes, sir.
And these new directives would come out based on an incident or issue that would happen?
Yeah, or a change of law. I mean, could be a myriad of reasons why a new policy and procedure may supersede an old one.
But one reason would be because an incident or issue happened?
Could happen, yes, sir.
So they have a new directive to make sure it doesn't happen again?
I've seen that happen, yes.
And when a new directive comes out, it's emailed to all employees of Boynton Beach Police Department?
Yeah, there's a notice that's sent out.
And you said you have to sign it.
Yeah, it's an electronic signature.
So all you have to do is open it and do a digital signature that you reviewed it?
Yes.
Nobody comes over to you and says, hey, we're going to do a training class next week on the proper use of informants, right?
No, sir.
And if there's an amendment in one of the directives, it's incumbent on the police officer to go back and figure out the prior directive, correct?
Well, they'll put a notice out that Index Code 100 has an amendment, and then, yes, you have to go back and then review it and sign for that as well, yes.
Okay. And let's discuss Ms. Eppolito's investigation. You were involved, right?
Yes, sir.
You were not the supervising detective or supervising sergeant?
I was a supervisor, a sergeant, working in that unit, and I was in charge the night we originally got the information that led us to begin the investigation. But I was not the lead supervisor. That was turned over to Sergeant Paul Sheridan.
So Sergeant Paul Sheridan was the lead supervising sergeant in Ms. Eppolito's investigation?
Yes.
But you were actively involved?
Yes, sir.
But at the end, you had to take orders from lead Sergeant Paul Sheridan because he was the lead sergeant?
Correct. It's his case.
So if he wanted something done, you had to do it?
Yes.
And just to be clear, had you been the lead sergeant in this case, you would have done some things differently in this investigation?
Based on what I know, yes.
And is it fair to say that there were some mistakes in this investigation?
Yes.
And many of these mistakes involve the monitoring and supervising of the confidential informant?
Yes.
And these mistakes compromise the integrity of the investigation?
All mistakes do, yes.
And at times during the investigation, that actually concerned you,
Yes, it did.
and you spoke out about that.
Yes, I did.
And nobody seemed to care, did they?
Well, the supervisor in charge just said we were doing it that specific way.
Despite your extensive experience.
Yes, sir.
Is that frustrating?
Yes, it is.
Because you take pride in what you do, don't you?
Yes, I do.
And at the end of the day, you want justice.
That is correct.
You want to make sure everyone gets a fair shot,
That's true.
that all investigations are done properly.
That is correct.
Well, we appreciate that. This investigation spanned from July 31st to August 5th, 2009, right?
Yes.
That's 6 days?
Yes, sir.
And in the entirety of this investigation, no one from the Boynton Beach Police Department ever told Mike Dippolito that he was in harm's way.
No, sir.
So for 6 days, one moment. So for 6 days until he was notified by the Boynton Beach Police Department in the Cops TV show, at his house, no one told Mike Dippolito that his life was in danger.
Not to my knowledge, no, sir.
No one put at any time any security or surveillance on Mike Dippolito.
I'm not aware of any.
So despite allegations that Miss Dippolito wanted to kill her husband, no one did anything to notify him or protect him.
Not that I'm aware of, no.
Instead, Miss Dippolito went home every night.
She did?
She went home to the person she was allegedly trying to kill,
Correct.
without anybody notifying him,
Yeah, he had no notification.
and without anyone conducting surveillance on him. And that would have been Sergeant Sheridan's call or Officer Moreno's call.
A combination, yeah, they would have decided what to do.
All right, let's shift gears and talk about what happened on the night of July 31st, 2009. You were the on-call detective, on-call sergeant, right?
Yes, sir.
You received a call from Detective Ace Brown.
That's true.
You were at home that night,
Yes, I was off duty at that time.
and you were told that a gentleman, Muhammad Jihad, walked into the Boynton Beach Police Department,
Yes.
and you have no idea how long he was at the department before you arrived?
No, I don't have a time frame.
You just know that Detective Brown spoke with him before you got there,
Correct.
and you don't know how long he spoke with him?
No, I don't.
And in general, when a person, a witness, walks into the police department, you don't immediately turn on a tape recorder, right?
No, you don't.
You want to establish rapport first.
Yes.
So if a witness comes in, you'll talk to them and you'll get their story.
Correct.
And then pursuant to proper practice, you want to record their interview as soon as possible.
Yeah, you want to get a recording of their statement while it's fresh, yes.
And that's also to preserve the integrity of the investigation.
That's true.
And is it fair to say that, hypothetically, talking to a witness for 2 to 3 hours without recording him is not good practice?
I really can't comment as to good practice. It's all mythology as far as what an officer does. I could talk to a person for 3 hours and not take a note, and then, after everything's calm, sit down with them with a notepad and my recorder and go over it again, and then take that information. So to say it's not a good practice, it's based on the total scenario, so I wouldn't just say it's bad practice. I would just say, in this case, I don't know if it was good or bad practice. I can't comment as to what Detective Brown was thinking or why he delayed his recording and notes.
That's because you were at home off duty?
Correct.
All right, so you don't know how long he was initially interviewed for?
No.
And in light of not knowing how long he was initially interviewed for, you don't know if he had any ulterior motives in coming in there.
You're talking about the CI?
Mr. Shehadeh, you don't know if he spoke to Ace Brown and told Detective Brown about any ulterior motives.
No, I'm not aware of any.
Because you weren't there.
Correct.
So it's possible.
Well, yeah, I can't comment on what I didn't hear, sir, no.
Okay. Let's talk about, based on your training and experience, what you're supposed to do when you use an informant in an undercover sting operation. Is it fair to say that the first thing you want to do is vet the informant?
Yes.
And just for the jury, what's vetting?
Well, vetting is basically a background dossier check on the person. You want to see if they're wanted, right? Because if they're wanted and active warrants or anything like that, we're not going to use them. You want to see if they have current cases pending, because if they have cases pending with the state, again, we're not going to use them without consenting with the state and see what the state wants to do. If a person, you know, basically there's a lot of informants, but let's just use the goodwill informant like all of you, right? You see something and you call the police. You're an informant, okay? You didn't get paid for it, you didn't sign up, you're not a confidential informant, but you're the good citizen type. Then there are people that are motivated by a whole variety of other reasons, working off charges, they're angry at you, they're mad at you. There's a lot of reasons why a person becomes an informant, and in most cases it's up to us immediately to vet what that is, identify the informant, run their name, run their information, make sure they're who they say they are, and then we have to go corroborate what they're saying they can do. You don't just say, oh, so-and-so is doing that, and we just say, oh, that's great, and here's our probable cause. We have to corroborate that. So, yes, vetting is an involved process.
And it's an important process.
Yes.
And just getting back to motives, you can't testify as to what motives he might have expressed to Detective Ace Brown because you weren't there.
No, I wasn't there.
And you're not aware of any proper vetting done on Muhammad Jihad, correct?
I have no access to that information.
So if Mr. Shehadeh hypothetically walked into the Boynton Beach Police Department, claimed that a woman wanted to kill her husband, and he didn't even know her last name, you'd be concerned about his reliability, right?
Well, I was actually present when he made those statements, so yes, I was.
So you were concerned about his reliability?
Yes, I was.
Why?
Because he made the statement that he had the person, you know, in his life. You know, he knows the person well, and he couldn't give me the name. I mean, how do you have a person in your life, you don't know who they are? So right up front, I was a little concerned about the veracity of his statement.
What do you want to know about the suspect?
I want to know everything,
Why?
so I can identify if there really is a person that matches that identification, and if there's a would-be victim out there whose life is in jeopardy, so I could safely handle the situation.
So he referred to a woman named Dalia,
He used a different name initially, I think Delilah.
Lila,
Yes.
her nickname. And at that point, you didn't know if she had a criminal record, right?
No, because we didn't have any other information. We had one single first name. You can't run any history or information on that.
And the Boynton Beach Police Department didn't have any information on the alleged victim in this case.
No, he didn't provide any information as to the victim's name.
And like you said, it's important to know this information, right?
Of course.
And once again, why would you want to know this information?
Immediately to safeguard the life of a person whose wife might be plotting to kill him.
And also, the state attorney's office should be notified in a case of this type to ensure the investigation's integrity, right?
Well, there are numerous times we contact the state attorney to work with us through a case on major case crimes. This one may or may not have fallen into that category so soon, but at some point the state should be involved, yes.
And you testified in the past that they weren't.
Not to my knowledge, no.
And that also concerned you, didn't it?
Yes.
One moment, Your Honor. All right, I'm going to discuss these confidential informant agreements. What's a confidential informant agreement?
It's a list of terms that each informant has to read, has to understand. We walk them through each one. It's almost like your Miranda rights. You know, it's a lengthy two-page document that tells the informant exactly what they can or can't do, what they should not do, what they can't be involved in, that they are not police officers, that they do not work as a police officer, that they don't do anything but work with our direction, and that everything's going to be recorded, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's a pretty lengthy document that basically tells you if you're going to be involved, you're going to listen to everything we tell you, you're not going to act on your own accord, and you're going to be held accountable later in the prosecution of the case.
So it sounds pretty extensive,
Yeah, it is.
and you seem to know it pretty well,
Yes, sir.
and that's because you're an experienced, you're an experienced sergeant.
Yes, sir.
And you said it sets forth the parameters of a relationship between the detective or sergeant and the undercover informant, right?
Yes, it does.
And it's imperative that the confidential informant understand each and every provision that he or she is signing on to, right?
Yes, sir.
And it's actually mandatory to go through each and every paragraph of the confidential informant with the confidential informant so that he or she knows exactly what's happening, right?
Yes, sir.
And why is that?
You want clear understanding. You don't want any misunderstanding. Because when you leave, we need to know that you understand your rights completely, because you don't have to cooperate. No one's putting a gun to anybody's head. No one's saying you have to do this. So if you're going to tell us you're going to work with us, you have to abide by these rules and regulations, period.
And that's also to control your informant
Correct.
and to maintain the integrity of the investigation.
Yes.
And once again, you weren't present when Detective Moreno went through the confidential informant packet with Mr. Shehadeh, right?
No, sir.
But hypothetically, if Detective Moreno only spent a few minutes on a confidential informant packet with him and didn't carefully explain all the provisions, you would be critical of that, right?
Hypothetically, yes.
Okay. And hypothetically, if Muhammad Jihad was confused about any of the provisions, and they were not properly explained to him, you would be critical of that, right?
Hypothetically, yes, sir.
Why is that?
Because again, it's very clear that in order to use a person, they have to have 100% understanding of what's involved and know their rights, and also know what the possible sanctions are if you violate these. I mean, it's clear in the contract too, if you do things that are illegal, you can be prosecuted. It's very clear.
And this would actually be a violation of Boynton Beach Protocol to not properly go through each paragraph, correct?
If that's true, yes, it would be a violation, yes.
And I think you testified to this, but just to be clear, if a detective does not properly explain a confidential informant agreement, this can compromise the investigation?
Yes.
One moment, Your Honor. And during your experience with confidential informants, and this is throughout your career, when an informant would tell you they no longer wanted to be an informant, you would stop using that informant, right?
Yeah, we can't force someone to continue being an informant and working with us.
And that's called, what's the
Coercion?
term for that?
Coercion?
All right. So you would deactivate the informant?
Correct.
So hypothetically, and just hypothetically, if Muhammad Jihad told Officer Moreno he did not want to cooperate in this investigation, he would have to be deactivated.
Well, obviously, if that were true, yes, we can't force him to continue.
Because that would compromise the integrity of the investigation.
Well, first of all, it's illegal. Can't make a person do something they don't want to do. So the investigation at this point takes kind of a back seat. If you don't want to cooperate any further, we can't make you do it, period.
So in that type of situation, it would both be illegal and it would compromise the integrity of the investigation.
Yes.
Because now you don't have a reliable informant.
Correct.
You don't have a trustworthy informant.
Well, we have a person that doesn't want to cooperate. Trust or whatever, that's not even relevant to what your scenario is. You're telling me he doesn't want to work anymore. There's no violation of trust because he doesn't want to work. It's simply a person saying, hey, I've thought about this, I don't want to do it. I mean, trust isn't even on the radar for me on that one. It's just simply, you don't want to do it, I can't make you do it.
And that goes for any type of confidential informant, right?
Yes.
Whether it be a drug informant,
Right. I've had people do that. I've had it happen.
an informant in a murder for hire case.
Yeah.
So in a situation such as a murder for hire case where an informant wants to be deactivated, is unwilling to cooperate, at that point, you would deactivate the informant, right?
Yes.
And you would notify the suspect that you could be in danger.
Well, you're asking for a lot in one sentence, but from what I understand, to make sure I get you, if the informant no longer wants to work, depending on where we were in that investigation, yes, we would have to make some decisions to either file the charges on the suspect, not file the charges on the suspect, notify the victim. Yeah, a whole lot of things would happen because we are no longer able to move forward with our operation. So whether I would be immediately notifying the victim, that's again part of it, but there's a lot to happen. When that investigation ceases to move forward, we have to make decisions at that point. A multitude.
Just to clarify, there's other things you can do aside from forcing other precautions you can take to maintain the safety of the alleged victim without forcing the informant to go forward.
Well, yeah, like I said, if the case has to stop and we have to secure the victim's safety, pull him out of there, notify him that, hey, this is what we were investigating, but now at this point, our investigation is at this place, but the suspect is so-and-so, and we're going to contact the prosecutor's office, and we're going to arrest her, or we're not going to arrest her, whatever we're going to do. But yeah, we'd have to secure his safety at that moment because we have no other option.
But forcing the unwilling confidential informant is not an option, right?
No, it's never an option.
And just to be clear, Officer Moreno had the majority of the interactions with Mr. Shehadeh?
From what I know, he was the lead detective, so he would be assigned to control and use the informant, yes.
And even though you weren't personally around when Mr. Shehadeh requested to be deactivated, you can't testify as to whether he asked Officer Moreno to do that?
No, I have no knowledge of that.
He very well might have.
Anything could happen when I'm not listening, of course. Yeah, I have no knowledge of it.
And that, I guess the same logic would go for threatening an informant, right?
Correct. A threat is obviously a violation of law, and it goes against protocol for the use and control of informants, so yes.
So anything's possible as to whether Officer Moreno threatened Mr. Shehadeh to continue to go forward with the investigation?
Yeah, I have no knowledge of any of that.
Because you weren't around,
That's true.
and you weren't the one primarily handling Muhammad Jihad.
No, I wasn't.
And while we're talking about threatening an informant, threatening an informant's illegal.
Yes,
It also compromises the integrity of an investigation.
yes,
No good will come from it.
that's true.
And that actually gives an informant new motives to act.
Well, it would if you're being threatened. It would give anybody motive to act, of course.
All right, let's shift gears and talk about these phone calls between Muhammad Jihad and Dalia Dippolito. All right. You are aware that there were several phone calls made between Muhammad Jihad and Dalia Dippolito, correct?
Yeah, I was made aware of it, yes.
Some were recorded,
I was told, yes.
and others were not recorded.
Yeah, I found that out later as well, yes.
And it's necessary for a confidential informant to be monitored and supervised to validate the information that they're providing law enforcement, right?
Yes,
It actually says in the confidential informant packet, or the directive, that an informant is not to do anything unless supervised or controlled by a Boynton Beach Police Department officer.
that's true.
So it was against Boynton Beach Police Department policies not to record all the calls.
Not necessarily.
It was bad practice not to record all the calls.
I would agree with practice versus violation of policy.
Okay. But it being bad practice, it can necessarily compromise the investigation.
Yes,
And as I'm not sure if you stated this, but all calls should be recorded and preserved to secure the integrity of the investigation.
yeah, and for evidence.
Yeah, and so there's no questions as to whether the informant is pressuring the suspect,
Correct.
threatening the suspect.
Agreed?
And as you testified, you were made aware that several phone calls were not recorded.
Yes,
And you'd be critical of this.
I would be, yes.
This is one of the things that you were critical, well, pardon me, you testified earlier that there were mistakes made in this investigation,
Yes,
and this was certainly one of those mistakes, wasn't it?
yes,
And that was Officer Moreno's job to ensure that those calls were recorded, right?
yes. He was the controlling detective, yes.
All right, so let's say, well, a couple things. Officer Moreno was working past 5 o'clock during this investigation, wasn't he?
We all were.
He didn't clock out at 5 p.m., did he?
No, not to my knowledge, we all worked around the clock, yes.
So hypothetically, if he testified, he only works 8 to 5, and then he clocks out, he'd be lying.
I don't know if he'd be lying. He could have clocked out at 5, but I'm just telling you, I'm not aware of it. Everybody that worked that case worked around the clock.
Even if he was not working around the clock, there are certain protocols and certain practices you can do as an experienced detective to ensure that there are not unrecorded phone calls.
You could take certain measures, yeah.
You can give someone a recording device, right?
Correct?
And what else could you do? Or let me take a step back. Let's say no detectives were around. And this is, in this situation, let's assume there were no detectives around. And Dalia Dippolito called Muhammad Jihad. And there was no recording device. What's the proper procedure?
You mean if he actually handled the call, you're asking me? What's the procedure after he's already handled the call that's not recorded, or are you asking me how to prevent it? I don't understand the question.
Well, what's the proper procedure if he answered the call?
Well, if he answered the call, you debrief him and take notes exactly what he tells you what was talked about. That's the best you can hope for. You can't get the information if it wasn't recorded other than the testimony of the officer.
But what's the proper procedure?
Well, the proper procedure in a perfect world, and we all know investigations aren't perfect, is to have a recording device. If there is no recording device available, normally you would direct that informant, if this person calls you, don't answer it and call me directly. Then I would instruct you as the informant what I want you to do next. Whether it's a three-way call with me on it secretly, whatever. I mean, there's a few options, but normally we would frown on them handling calls and making calls without reporting to us. We want to debrief you as soon as you're done. So in that question, should that call have been made? As soon as he spoke with the controlling agent, the controlling agent would take notes as to what you're telling me the conversation was about. And obviously, it's your testimony of the informant at that point. We want to eliminate the testimony of informants in cases. And I don't know if anybody explained that, but that's the reality of it. We want you to help us, but we don't want to have the case rest on your shoulders. So the more evidence we gather by recording it, the less it rests on your shoulders. And your testimony as to what you said happened versus this is exactly what you said happened, here it is on tape.
And per our discussion, there were countless phone calls made by Muhammad Jihad to Dalia Dippolito that were not recorded.
I became aware of that, yes.
And that's a problem.
To me, it is.
And that's a problem because we have no idea what happened on those phone calls.
Correct. I also don't know if he was directed to make those calls. I have no knowledge of it.
If he was directed to make those phone calls with no detectives around, that would be even a bigger problem.
Again, it depends on who's in charge of the investigation and what their reasoning is. Again, if I was in charge, as you asked me hypothetically, I would have concerns, yes.
So just to backtrack, he could have been given a recording device,
Yes.
and there are other procedures you can follow to avoid or to maintain the integrity of an investigation if he does not have a recording device,
Yes.
such as not answering and giving the detective a call.
That would have been one, yes.
And we don't know what happened on those phone calls.
No.
We don't know if Muhammad Jihad threatened her during those phone calls.
Yeah, we don't know.
And this all concerns you.
Yes, it does.
And this was as you testified earlier about mistakes made in this investigation, this was a mistake by Officer Moreno.
I believe so, yes.
All right, I want to refer to the Boynton Beach Police Department Directive on Informants from June 22nd, 2009, Index Code 1622. I believe that's Defense Exhibit, is that 9, Madam Clerk? We'd be on 9? All right, I'm referring to page 5, the underlined portion. Give me one moment. You just take a look at this and read sections B and C.
I didn't bring my reading glasses, but I could see it's a little, it's a little off there. Apologize. You want me to read it out loud and make a fool of
Please.
myself? All right. When using an informant, the officer must control the direction of the operation and the informant. The officer must never place himself or herself in the position of having to act when there is, what is the word? It looks like it's a typo maybe, I don't even know. Insufficient, I guess, manpower or equipment to ensure the credibility of the investigation and the safety of all parties involved. That's the first part.
So in fact, Officer Moreno did violate Boynton Beach policy by not having Mr. Shehadeh have this equipment, according to that directive.
But the policy also states it's the officer direction. So again, there's perception when you have a policy, it's a guideline, right? It's not a law. So if it says at the direction of, like I said earlier, I don't have knowledge of it, but if Detective Moreno gave the informant the direction to make that call or receive it, then he wasn't violating the policy per se. You understand?
But it was just bad practice.
Correct. It's bad practice because here we are having this lengthy discussion about it.
Exactly.
You understand?
Correct. I want to shift gears and talk about the infamous Chile's meeting between Muhammad Jihad and Dalia Dippolito. You are aware of that meeting?
Yes.
And at that meeting, you were across the street?
Actually, at the Chili's meeting, I was inside that same plaza on the north of Chili's.
And you were in an unmarked vehicle?
Yes.
Were you by yourself?
I was with Sergeant Bonifaire.
Were you with him the entire time?
Yes.
And at some point, you were notified that there was a malfunction with the wire?
Well, that was prior to that. That's when you're preparing to go to Chili's.
All right, let me
Yes.
take a step back.
Yes.
Earlier in the day, you went to Chili's, and Whitey Jean's car was wired.
No, you might want to, your facts aren't straight.
I want you to tell me what happened.
The unmarked car for the undercover officer was being pre-wired at a different location. It's not at Chili's.
Okay.
Definitely not there. Okay, that's happening somewhere else, and that's being set up with video and audio surveillance for the meet between the undercover police officer and the suspect. That's where that's happening. Chili's is a whole meeting where the informant's supposed to meet the suspect, and we're on a perimeter, and the suspect is supposed to meet the informant, who's supposed to be wired during the course of that meeting. So that's two separate things are happening.
Okay, but at some point, someone put a wire on Muhammad Jihad,
I was told he was going to be wired, correct.
and that's to maintain the integrity of the investigation.
Absolutely. And secure evidence from the statements that may be made by the suspect.
And you learned that you were informed that the wire malfunctioned.
Yes.
And were you at the police station when you learned this?
No, I was actually in the field with Sergeant Bonifaire and a few other officers while they were wiring the car for the undercover officer, where I was told, oh, by the way, we only have one operational wire. I said, what happened? The other one's not working. I said, well, we got to get one. So I went to the station at that point to talk to Sergeant Sheridan and make him aware in case he had not known that there was a malfunction and that we needed to get one.
So you actually went back to the station and told Sergeant Paul Sheridan, the lead sergeant in this case, that the wire malfunctioned.
Correct. I asked him. I wanted to confirm it. I said, this is what I heard.
What did he say to you?
Yes. It's not working.
That's what he said to you.
Yes.
And what did you say to him?
I said, we got to get another one. Let me call the sheriff's office. I could call Del Rey. Take me about 45 minutes. I could have one.
And you had time to do that, right?
I was under no impression that we had an exigency to move forward that would prevent us from securing the wire.
And when you told Sergeant Paul Sheridan, the lead sergeant in this case, that the wire had malfunctioned, that you were told the wire had malfunctioned, and that you needed a new wire, what did he say to you?
He said, we're going without it.
What did you say to him?
I said, it's a bad idea. We need the evidence. We got to get a wire. It'll take me 30, 40 minutes. Simple.
You wanted to make sure nothing improper was going on in Chili's, right?
I wanted to do this right.
And what did Sergeant Paul Sheridan say to you at that point?
It's his investigation, and we're going without it.
What did he say to you after that?
Well, I walked out of the office into the main area where other detectives were, and I was upset about it. And he came out and then used profanity.
I'm sure Your Honor doesn't mind if he uses the profanity, explains exactly what was said.
Is there any need to?
I think there is, Judge, to show the extent of this interaction.
He can use whatever language is appropriate.
Can you please tell the jury exactly what Paul Sheridan said to you?
Well, excuse me, but I'm being asked to use the language. I don't want to use it, but he told me it was his fucking investigation and to get out.
You weren't too happy with that, were you?
No, sir.
And who was present for that?
Detective Moreno, Detective Anderson, a handful of other detectives that were getting ready to go on the surveillance.
All right, so at that point, or shortly thereafter, you returned to Chili's?
Yeah, I left immediately, sat in the car, waited for Sergeant Bonifair, and drove out to Chili's.
So you went from sitting in your car at Chili's, or in the plaza at Chili's, excuse me, to the Boynton Beach Police Station, Boynton Beach Police Department, and then back to Chili's.
Now remember, we're going to Chili's first. We were in a different location, securing the car, to the police station, then to Chili's.
I think you had told me this was roughly 2 hours, this entire...
Well, from the time of the setting up of the cars, yeah, a couple hours had passed,
From
yes.
the time you learned that there was someone told you there was a malfunction until you got back there.
Yeah, it was a few hours. By the time we actually set up at Chili's and waited for the informant and the suspect to meet.
So at that point, you could have went to Boca Police Department and got another wire?
I could have contacted several agencies and received another wire.
You could have went to Delray Police Department and got a wire?
Yes,
You could have went to the Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office?
yes.
And you could have went to Delray there and back 2 or 3 times, it sounds like, in that amount of time, huh?
I could have went to just about any agency and got one, yes.
And is it fair to say that this was a big mistake in this investigation?
Yes, it was.
And this necessarily compromised the integrity of this investigation?
It does.
Because we have no idea what happened in Chili's.
No, we have no idea what was spoken about in Chili's.
We have no idea whether Muhammad Jihad threatened Dalia Dippolito to go forward with this murder for hire plot while in Chili's.
We have no information as to what was said.
Because Paul Sheridan wanted to move forward with his investigation.
He wanted it to move forward without the wire, correct?
And just to be clear, there was no exigency because of the amount of time you had to get that wire, right?
I wasn't made aware of any.
Because you said there was a roughly 2-hour time gap from when you were setting up the car to going to see Sergeant Sheridan to going back to Chili's before the meeting happened.
Correct.
So having that amount of time, there wouldn't be any exigency.
Something would have had to change because remember, we learned about this alleged plot 5.5 days earlier.
But nothing.
So nothing, I hadn't learned of anything that changed the dynamics of the exigent circumstances to prevent us from getting that wire.
But even if something had changed, there were still ways you could have delayed, or not you, Officer Moreno or Sergeant Sheridan could have delayed this meeting a little bit to get a wire.
You know, let's put it this way. Just put it simple so you guys could really get an idea of what I'm saying. At that point, as long as we had the suspect in our control coming to us, the victim was not in danger, okay? There's no way she could be in 2 places at once. So had we had a problem and needed to delay it, we could have used the informant on a control call to direct that suspect to go to another location, say that he got a flat tire. There could have been 100 things we could have done. Don't worry, we're going to get the meeting on, I just got a delay. We could have delayed it. We were controlling it. It was our investigation. The suspect is on our time. We're not on the suspect's time unless something happens. As I said, the word exigency means an emergency. That would have popped up, but we would have only known from one person, the informant. The informant would have said, hey, I just got a call. She's got a gun. She's got a... Well, then everything falls apart at that point because we have to act to save the victim. I didn't become aware of any such information that would change the direction of us securing that wire.
And you've consistently been critical about the failure to get the wire, haven't you?
Yes.
One moment, Your Honor. And just a few hypothetical questions as a experienced sergeant. When dealing with a confidential informant, it would not be, hypothetically, it would not be appropriate to take their car keys and lie to them and install a camera in their vehicle without them knowing, right?
That wouldn't be a good decision, no.
And hypothetically, it would also not be appropriate to lie to an informant that they will remain anonymous for them to get, to get them to sign a confidential informant agreement.
If that was the pretext of the signature, that would be also illegal and a bad idea. It's coercion. You do tell informants, we want to do our best not to make you present in court. Okay, that's why we want to put the wire on. That's why we want to use other means to gather the evidence. Okay, that's the main goal. But at some point, it's even in the documents, they may be required to testify. So you can't tell them they're not going to testify. You have to make them aware there's that strong possibility you may have to testify.
And also, in your training and experience, if a detective is around a confidential informant and control calls are being made, all of those calls should be recorded, if they have the capability of doing so.
Correct.
And also, while at Chili's, one or more Boynton Police Department officers could have been acting in an undercover capacity, sitting near them and listening to the conversation.
That's true. That didn't happen either.
Another problem with the investigation,
Yes.
which you had no control over because you were forced to listen to Sergeant Paul Sheridan,
I made my recommendations, and that was all I can do.
and he didn't want to hear it.
No, he had his own plan.
And you've never seen or heard the audio recording of the Chili's encounter?
Well, what do you mean? There was none to my knowledge. I'm not aware of any.
Based on what Detective Bonifair told you regarding the malfunction?
Yeah, but there was no audio to listen to. You just said I'm not aware of hearing it. Did I misunderstand you?
No, I'm just curious that Detective Bonifair was the one who told you that there was no, that the wire malfunctioned, right?
Correct.
Okay. One moment, Your Honor. All right, I want to talk about what happened subsequent to Ms. Eppolito's arrest back at the Boynton Beach Police Department. While you were there were members of the Cops TV show production team there, right?
Yes.
And that was for the purpose of creating their reality TV show?
Yes.
You weren't happy with that, were you?
No, sir.
Because that was interfering with your ability to conduct an appropriate investigation.
I feel strongly against having anybody with cameras running around live while we do an investigation.
And regardless of whether they had their own cameras, you know, there are cameras in all areas of the Boynton Beach Police Department, right?
Yes.
One moment, Your Honor. And without getting into the specifics of any interrogations, Sergeant Sheridan at one point, as you're aware, got in a altercation with a member of the production team from Cops.
Yeah, I heard of that. I wasn't present, but I heard of it.
Sustained.
Untimely objection, Judge. You already answered the question. It wasn't contemporaneous.
The objection is sustained.
All right, so back at the station, things got a little out of control because many of the detectives, not all, many of the detectives wanted to get their 15 minutes of fame and be the investigator, the detective that solved the crime, right?
Objection, Judge. This is leading and argumentative.
May I approach, Judge?
You can approach.
Grab one thing, Judge. And once again, we're not this has nothing to do with any specific interrogation. I don't want you to discuss that. But from what you saw, a lot of people, or many people, many of the detectives wanted their 15 minutes of fame.
There was a lot of confusion in the detective division at that point.
That was also concerning to you,
Yes.
and that also compromised the investigation.
Yeah, it kind of changed the direction.
And that shouldn't happen.
No, that was a distraction. That shouldn't have been there.
Because the goal of an investigation is to solve a crime.
That's correct.
It's not to make a TV show.
No.
And in addition to, well, let me rephrase that. You are aware, without referring to any specific incident, any specific video, you are aware that there were videos posted on YouTube in this case.
Yes.
And I'm going to refer to just 2 videos right now. Did not mention anything else. One was a video with Muhammad Jihad and Dalia Dippolito.
Yeah,
And a video with Jean and Dalia Dippolito.
yes.
And in fact, some of those videos were posted by Boynton Beach Police Department, right?
I'm not aware of when and how they got posted, but I was told later. But I couldn't give you confirmation on who posted them and when.
But Stephanie Slater was involved.
Yeah, she's the PIO for the police department, and she would have direct involvement in anything that goes media. Yes.
So even though you don't know who from the department posted them, it would go through Stephanie Slater.
It would have to be authorized through her and all the way up to the chief of police to put out any type of media like that.
And that at the time would have been Chief Imler?
Yes.
And just taking a step back in regard to Cops, and by Cops I mean the Cops TV show, you were ordered to sign the waivers to appear on Cops, right?
Yes.
You didn't have a choice.
No.
They walked in there, threw the waivers down, and said you are signing these and you're going to appear on Cops.
I was directed to sign it via my major.
And you're not in a position to say otherwise.
No.
And that's because there's a chain of command?
Correct.
And you were not happy with that, were you?
No, I voiced my opinion.
And once again, nobody cared.
I was told that you're going to have the TV show. I was told that you're going to have the TV show Cops ride with you, and that's the end of it. Get out of the office. I mean, it's just the way it is.
And that concerned you because having a TV show involved in an investigation can compromise the investigation.
It changes the dynamics of how people interact. Plain and simple.
Detectives could have different motives for how they investigate a crime because of a TV show being involved.
Like I said, it changes the way people act and interact with one another when there's a camera with a bright light standing next to you.
And also, pursuant to Boynton Beach Police Department policies and procedures, and let me just quote this, the disclosure of an informant's identity will be avoided whenever possible.
That's true.
And in this case, based on the posting of the videos we referred to involving Mr. Shehadeh, that policy was not followed.
Off the top of my head, I can't tell you if his face was visible or not. I don't remember. I don't recall that video in particular. So if his identity was divulged, yes, it's a direct violation.
And that would have been done to get media attention for Boynton Beach Police Department, right?
There's no other reasoning to put it out there.
And the problem with posting videos, posting the videos I've referred to, isn't just that it can compromise the investigation, but that it can compromise subsequent prosecution.
That's correct.
And that's a big concern of yours.
Yes.
Another mistake by Boynton Beach Police Department.
Yes.
So it sounds like former Sergeant Paul Sheridan made some pretty big mistakes in this case.
He made decisions that I wouldn't have agreed with.
That compromised the integrity of this investigation.
Yes.
It sounds like Officer Moreno made some decisions in this case you would not agree with.
He could have been following orders. Again, yes, he could have done a better job.
That compromised the integrity of this investigation.
Yes.
And it sounds like even Stephanie Slater, the media relations director, supervisor, made decisions in this case that compromised the integrity of the prosecution.
Yes.
And after the cop show was aired, you were actually forced or ordered to do a podcast, right?
Yeah, there was a lot of follow-up, media follow-up that was required, yes.
You didn't want to do that, did you?
No.
But they made you do it.
When you receive an order and you're directed to do it, you do it.
In fact, they still, after the investigation, had cops walking around the department, filming everybody doing alleged tasks, right?
Yeah, they had to complete the show.
I mean, at one point, they ordered you to sit by a computer that was turned off and pretend you were working.
That's correct?
You weren't happy about that, were you?
No.
One moment, Your Honor. Nothing further, Judge. Sergeant Ranzie, thank you very much for your cooperation.
All right, cross-examination?
Whose idea was it to murder Michael Dippolito?
Sustained.
May we approach?
Yes.
Was it your idea to do the hit on Michael Dippolito?
No, sir.
Was it Alex Moreno's?
No.
When you talk with Mr. Shehadeh, was it his idea?
No.
You and Sergeant Sheridan didn't like each other, right?
Not at that time, no.
We have no idea what happened at the Chili's on August 3rd of 2009 about 5:30 in the afternoon, right? No idea.
If that's this, is that the meeting time, sir? Yes, we don't know what happened inside, no.
Did you see the defendant go into Chili's?
Yes.
And did you see her exit the Chili's?
Yes.
And tell the jury, did she appear to be frightened to you?
She appeared to walk normally like she did when she entered.
Did she appear to be scared?
No.
Did she appear to be terrified?
No, it was a casual walk in and out.
She appeared no different than when she went in. Is that right?
That's correct.
And wouldn't it be critical if we want to know if somebody was just threatened with their life or something like that, that they were terrified about doing something, wouldn't you want to know the next interaction they have and look at maybe the video and actually see her and see how she responds right after leaving the Chili's?
Yeah,
Would that be good evidence?
that would be good evidence, yes, sir.
So if she meets with Witty Jean right after leaving the Chili's, and we can see her on video, wouldn't that be great evidence?
Yes,
And you saw that.
yes,
And you've been with hundreds of people, if not thousands, that have been victims of horrible crimes.
yes, I have.
You've seen people terrified all the time,
Yes, I have.
scared,
Yes, sir.
threatened.
Yes.
Did she appear that way at all in that video?
No, sir.
Everything that you mentioned to this jury as a concern, it would be to make as a perfect investigation.
Correct.
But all your concerns, though, are just kind of speculation, because do you have any evidence to show this jury that investigation was compromised?
No, I have no evidence, no.
That's all I have. Thank you very much.
All right. Redirect?
Yes. Oren, you just testified that, there are no perfect investigations.
That's true.
Does that justify several serious mistakes in an investigation?
No, but I did testify with you earlier that in a perfect world, was one of my statements, you would like everything to go a certain way. And these investigations take on a life of their own. They're moving, and you have to adapt to them. In this case, as we discussed, I had concerns with some of the adaptions that were or were not made.
And this wasn't a situation where mistakes just happened that you couldn't control. These were mistakes that you could have prevented based on your actions by going to Paul Sheridan.
Well, I know we could have prevented the meeting with the informant and the suspect at Chili's without being recorded, perhaps that one, but I don't know if I could have prevented the others.
But the other mistakes could have been prevented, including Officer Moreno not recording the phone calls.
There could have been better measures taken by Detective Moreno and Sergeant Sheridan to try to secure more contact information between the informant and the suspect, yes.
But, just because not every investigation's perfect, as Mr. Williams just said, doesn't mean these mistakes, as you testified, didn't compromise the integrity of the investigation.
Well, they definitely compromised it.
And prior to this investigation, you don't know Dalia Dippolito?
Never seen her before.
Okay, so you don't know what her normal mannerisms are?
No, I do not.
You don't know what she looks like when she appears afraid?
No, I've never seen her before.
Does everyone look the same when they appear afraid?
No, but there are some which I've taken enough classes between interview, investigative skills, and body language that would determine if a person looks like they're in a panic or not.
For some people.
Yes.
Some people are more neutral in their mannerisms.
Sure.
And when she walked out with Muhammad Jihad and met with Jean, how far was Jean from Chili's?
It couldn't even be a 1/12 of a mile. It's literally one plaza across a large intersection into another plaza and a parking lot. I mean, it's very short distance, probably 300-400 yards tops.
300-400 yards. You could walk 300-400 yards, right?
Sure.
And Dalia Dippolito didn't walk over there by herself, did she?
No.
She actually got in Muhammad Jihad's car and he drove her 300-400 yards.
Correct.
Nothing further, Your Honor.
All right, you may step down. Thank you.
Thanks, sir.
All right, members, sure, we're going to go ahead and break for lunch. I apologize again. We went longer than what I normally would for the lunch break. I was trying to finish a witness before we took our break. So it's basically be the same break I think we took yesterday. I'll give you an hour and 15 minutes. So we need you back at 2 o'clock so you can be released until 2 o'clock. As always, please do not discuss the case amongst yourself or anyone else. Please do not do any research. Please do not listen to or read any news at counsel trial. Have a pleasant lunch. We'll see you back at 2 o'clock. All right, counsel, you may be seated. Yeah, 9. You never actually formally moved 9 into evidence. You read from it. No one objected to you reading from it, but you actually never moved defense 9 into evidence, as I recall. You just gave it to him, said, is this a policy, and had him start reading from it.
We're not going to move in 9 into evidence. As a housekeeping matter, when I did my examination of Officer Moreno, he did authenticate exhibits 1 and 2 that I marked, and I'd like to...
You want to move them in now?
Yes, I'd like to move 1 and 2 into evidence.
Any objection to 1 and 2? I'm sorry, is that a no? One of them is, I thought, was the CSI.
I try to show you guys, and then kind of push them away, so they're policies and procedures.
Well, 9, is that going to be ID only then? If it was referred to by a witness, it still has to be marked and given to the clerk. So we need 9, it'll just, if you don't want to move it in, we'll make it ID only.
We're only going to move in 1 and 2.
All right, any objection to 1 and 2? All right, 1 and 2 in evidence without objection. 9 will have to be given to the clerk to mark for ID only.
Thank you.
All right. Yes, yes.
Thank you.
Okay, I've got a question. Mr. Rosenfeld, this is going to be directed to you. You moved for a judgment of acquittal on objective entrapment and told me that was an issue for the jury. Did you research that?
We are in the middle of writing the pleading, for Your Honor, actually. We wrote about...
Well, you would agree with Mr. Rosenfeld, you would have an ethical obligation to disclose to me any appellate authority contrary to that position. You have to agree with that. That's the ethics. I don't know how you disagree with that.
No, I agree with that.
Okay, you would agree with me the Florida Supreme Court would be an authority I'd have to look at.
Yes, Judge.
Okay. Do your research before you make that argument again.
Just to be clear, the Florida Supreme Court case law I saw, I believe was from 1980, I'm not sure what Your Honor has in front, I don't know the case name, said it was a matter of law, never said it could not be raised as an affirmative defense that I found. I mean, this is what I researched and found, me and Mr. Greenlee found.
Okay, the Glosson case quite clearly says objective entrapment is a question for the court as a matter of law. Subjective entrapment is for the jury.
You have the cite on that, Judge?
Sure. It's probably the premier, I mean, it's the first case on not the first case on entrapment, 462 Southern 2nd, 1082. Also look at Campbell v. State, 935 Southern 2nd, 614. Explains the difference.
1 second, Judge. What's that cite?
The second one is 614 Southern 2nd, 935. Campbell v. State.
I will include those in the pleadings when we're done. You'll have that by tomorrow.
Okay,
As Your Honor
remember,
ordered.
you have to cite to me not only law that you think supports your position, but any law that you're aware of which would be contra to your position. That's your ethical obligation.
Oh, no, Judge, I completely understand. The case I had in the short, like I said, this has been a rushed event for all of us, I found was suggested that it was an issue of law. I never read one of these cases that said it was only an issue of law, not that it could not be raised as an affirmative defense also. But we will
Take a look at the law,
clearly
because you're arguing a motion for judgment of acquittal, and I had not had time. I was relying on my understanding of the law without having done the research, okay? I've now done the research. I continue to believe, and I'll look at whatever pleadings you want to give me, objective entrapment is a due process violation. It is to be determined by the court as a matter of law. Subjective, not objective, entrapment goes to the jury. I believe that is the controlling law in this state. I realize there's some confusion caused by those cases you gave me with some dicta, but take a look at the law, starting with the Florida Supreme Court.
No, I will. We're actually also in the process of getting the jury instructions and the case law provided to the court from Broward, where those cases were argued. One of the cases was from the 4th DCA to see if that provides any additional insight for the court. I had requested those this morning.
Okay, I mean, that's fine.
That's why we wanted to provide you with a pleading. That was our intention. That's what I told Your Honor I was going to provide you with a pleading with all the case law.
I'm just going to quote from the Supreme Court so you're aware. The due process defense based on governmental misconduct is an objective question of law for the trial court, as opposed to the subjective predisposition question submitted to the jury as an entrapment defense. That's the Florida Supreme Court, and it's not been overruled. And it's been cited by other cases. So I'll listen to whatever you have to say, I mean, obviously, but I just want you to be aware, I continue to believe that objective entrapment is a due process violation, and it must be decided by the court. Subjective entrapment is an issue for the jury. Certainly you're entitled to subjective entrapment in this case. I don't believe objective entrapment goes to the jury, but I'll see whatever you come up with. I'm just telling you, this took me 5 minutes to find these cases.
No, but Judge, I respectfully, of course, I disagree with, your allegation toward me. I think that even with what you just quoted, because it said it's an issue of law, doesn't mean necessarily that you can't raise an affirmative defense from that. Obviously, a juror cannot determine whether it's a due process violation, but the way egregious entrapment is defined, and you'll see this in my proposed jury instruction, it can be an issue of fact. And when you see the pleading, you'll understand our position.
I'll take a look at your plea. I'm
I
not,
just
I'm not
don't-
going to foreclose it at this time. It's just I did 5 minutes worth of research and reached the conclusion that I was probably right about my initial reaction. But I'll look at whatever you have to say.
But no, I think you made a, may I approach, Judge, with the state?
Sure. can,
And just
Boynton Retail.
So you control it and it takes pictures of this? Yeah, I was wondering how they show pictures of this.
you're here, right after lunch, 5 minutes, you'll be out here.
Two?
What time did you say? Yeah, you'll be in that. I thought you knew him before, I'm sorry.
We're getting out early today? Oh, I don't know. Greg, is that what you said?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, guys, I gotta close up.
Yeah, I have to run one thing out for, if I can have 2 seconds.
Lawyer,